Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange, and the host who might be a ghost. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual literature that I have found in my travels, and sometimes I even do a tag video. I was tagged by Lucas from Bits of Lit, the Bits of Lit, no, it's one of those things, to do the Reread tag. He is a high quality person, although he can be devious and dangerous at times. So, look out for that. Go check out his tag video. It's a pretty cool one. So I figured I would do this one. I don't do every tag video because a lot of it is like stuff I can't do because it's like specific genres or specific types of books that I don't get into. So there's not a lot that I could say, but the reread tag is something that I feel that I can do. So without further ado, let's get to the questions, of which there are 9, and I will put them in the description so that you may find them and be tagged and such. I don't have anyone that I want to tag just because I don't really know people on BookTube. But Noah from Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse, if you haven't done this video yet, and I don't think you have, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, carry on with your life. Question 1 is on the rereading scale from almost never to all of the time. Where do I fall? So if almost never is like a 0 and all the time is a 10, I would say I'm about a 6. I do make a lot of attempts to reread books, especially books that I love, books that I had a significant impact on me. But that's not my primary mode. I often look towards books that I haven't read before. So I'm trying to find new books, new stuff that I haven't really read or learned about. Trying to experience as much of the literary world as I can. But I'm a 6, and I do reread from time to time. You may have seen that in a couple of my videos where I talk about books that I've read before, and that I reread either because I enjoyed it the first time or because I wanted to see if it held up. So I think that's my answer there. The second question is, has this changed over my reading life? I would say yes and no. Yes, because in high school I didn't really reread books. And that might just be because, I hadn't read that many books in high school yet. So every book that I read was technically new. It wasn't something I was rereading. I definitely reread more in my late 20s than I do than I did in high school. But also it hasn't really changed because even after high school, I went back and read books that I read in high school and in middle school. And I do that now. So I'd say I've always been about a 6. It's just, based on the availability of books that I can reread, that I feel like that's the only reason why it's changed. The third question is, when do I reread? I think the answer to that is I reread when I have a lull in the new books that I found. I recently reread Before I Fall, and I did that because I had read all the books that new books that I intended to read. There's still a whole bunch that I forgot about at the time, and I'm like, I need to reread that. So, but I felt that there was a gap in like what I had intended to read in the future. So I was like, let's fill that with something that I've read before, something that I definitely want to talk about on this channel. But a lot of the times when I choose to reread is based upon like, I haven't read this in a while, or somebody reminds me of the book. For example, on Twitter, I saw someone talk about World War Z as it pertained to the coronavirus. And I was like, wow, I hadn't seen that. So I was like, I should definitely reread it and see if I capture any themes. And boy, howdy did I. I think I choose to reread when like I want a fresh take on a book, or when I want to be reminded how great a book is, especially given that when I read it the first time, it was high quality. The fourth question is, why do I reread? And I think I just answered that. I think now the more I realize it, I answered that with the third question. So when and why, I feel like those are the same. But when do I reread specifically? It's usually maybe a little while after the fact of reading it the first time. I'm not going to reread a book in the same year that I first read it because I need some distance between the book, so that way when I go back and reread it, I'm not like bored, or I'm not like, oh, it's following all these beats and like it's predictable. I gotta forget about the book somewhat in order to go back and reread it, which like it's good. Like it took me 20 years to get to Holes again, so like I it wasn't as fresh in my mind. I reread Before I Fall, and I read it last year. So like it was a bit more fresher in my mind, and I kind of do wish I would have waited maybe another year, another 6 months to get at it. But I think it's fine. I don't reread books on a yearly basis. Again, because I want that distance between it. But if a book is really good, I will. I think I will wait a year in between. A read before the next reread. So how do I reread? Is it faster? Is it slower? Is it only the best bits? And I gotta wonder, who only reads the best bits of a book? If you're reading a book and you're only like going towards the best bits, like it's out of context. Like the exciting and great things that are a part of a story only make sense in the context of the book as a whole, at least in my opinion. If you disagree, feel free to comment below. I would love to have a discussion with you on this. I think a good example of this is East of Eden, where you have the end of the book with the characters talking about the idea of Temshel, and that only makes sense if you read the whole book. If you go back and just read the Temshel book, yeah, it'll probably be pretty good. John Steinbeck is a wonderful author, but I don't think it'd be as good if you didn't read the whole book. If you didn't see the entire story of the Cain and Abel, like big metaphor. Adam Trask, the Trask family. I do think that you need to read more than just the best bits. As for faster and slower, I would say if a book doesn't hold up, I might read it faster than I did before. But more often is the case, like with World War Z and with Before I Fall, which I recently reread. I did read it a bit slower, just because I'm trying to get out what I didn't notice before, and these are really good books, so I want to savor them, especially because I know they're good, and since I know they're good, like I want to enjoy every single part, and like sometimes I'll flip a couple pages back and just reread entire passages again, which I don't typically do on my first read, unless something really stands out and is really cool. So like I'll typically read slower unless the book is like worse than I expected. Question 6 is, who or what do I reread? Is it certain authors, certain genres? I would say there's no real rhyme or reason to what I reread. Anything is on the table as long as it was good the first time I read it. I might not reread nonfiction. Although I have reread The Life and Death of WCW, one of my favorite books before, and that's nonfiction. And I have reread Randy Pausch's The Last Lecture because it was high quality, and again that's a nonfiction biography. So I would say that. Nothing's off the table. Are there certain genres that I might be more attracted to upon rereading? Maybe if they have like a cool hook to them, like Before I Fall is about a death loop of sorts, where someone keeps reliving their last day they lived, and World War Z was about a zombie a zombie war of some sort. So those were interesting. Am I likely to reread Michael Crichton's Prey, which I made a video on? Absolutely not. That book was bad. So I think there is like books that I'm drawn to for rereading. Although I haven't quite figured that out. Maybe it's worth analyzing in the future. Is there a book you found better when you reread it? Is the seventh question, and I think that's a hard question to answer because along with the next question, it's going to be like, is it in one that was worse? So is there a book that is better when I reread it? And I would say Before I Fall. Again, that's fresh in my mind because I just reread it. So I think that's a good answer, but I like the first time I read it, it was amazing, and like when I reread it, it was even more amazing because I noticed a whole bunch of things I didn't catch the first time. So I guess that's a good answer, but I don't think there's any book that I found to be bad or mediocre that I went upon rereading I didn't find as interesting. And that's just because if a book is bad, I typically don't give it a second chance. The only exception, and Noah's going to probably laugh at this, is House of Leaves. I found it to be a bit difficult to read, but I am interested in rereading it, and I probably think like it'll be great upon rereading, but that's going to take a while because again I want some distance between it. I only read it in June, and also it's a big old like hefty book that's going to take quite a bit of thought, and you know it's a Herculean effort right there. And so, is there a book that I found to be worse upon rereading it? I know a lot of people aren't going to like me saying this, but it might be The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Douglas Adams' charm and his wit, like it was pretty good when I first read the book in high school, but after rereading it, like I still see that charm and wit, and he's a wonderful like author, but it didn't have the same effect on me as it did before. Maybe I was maybe I was just too used to it, or like I had previously watched the movie and I was busy comparing the two, but I didn't find it as interesting as before, and I know people might not like that, and I'm sorry for that, but that's just how I feel. I think another good example is the Harry Potter series, where when I read it as a youth, it was pretty good, and then I read it in college, and I found myself comparing it to a lot of the books I read in college, and a lot of the books that I read like in my spare time. And I could see like how like J.K. Rowling writes pretty good for a young adult fiction author, but she is absolutely horrible. Like when you compare her to literally anybody else, and so maybe her writing didn't hold up in the way I expected. And then I guess another final example is the Alex Rider series. It's like James Bond for teenagers, and again, I read it in my youth, I read it in high school, and it was great. I love the series, but when I reread it a couple of years ago, I found it to be very formulaic. It adheres to a formula, and that's not necessarily bad, but it makes each book kind of predictable. And so the last question, question 9, is which book have you reread the most times? I think that might be, a tie. It might actually be the Harry Potter series, just because I read it so many times in middle school and high school. But excluding that, I would have to say the answer is probably Before I Fall, where I've read it countless times since I first read it 10 years ago. And the other answer might be World War Z. Again, like two of my favorite books, two books that I immediately glommed onto when I within the first year of starting my channel, just so I could talk about how great they are. I've read World War Z a couple times since it came out. Really exciting book, and along with that, the Zombie Survival Guide that he wrote as a companion piece. I read that, but unfortunately, I left that at home when I moved to college, and I haven't been able to reclaim it from my parents since then. So that's unfortunate. Otherwise, I probably would have reread it like hundreds of times by now, and that might be my answer here. Those are my answers to the reread tag. I love rereading books just because rereading allows you to see a book from a different perspective. It allows you to pick up on things that you maybe didn't catch the first time, which I always enjoy. Like seeing a book with a different perspective is what makes reading fun. Like, and not every read through of East of Eden will be the same for me, and I would hope so. Like, it's a large book, and like hopefully there's something new to capture each time. The same goes with Before I Fall. You know, there's a lot to pick up in that book, and I still don't think that I picked up on everything that maybe Lauren Oliver was trying to say, and maybe there's more there than Lauren Oliver was trying to say, like stuff like Death of Author, and like you could just lean on so many different things, but you know, that it requires rereading to get through, and it's always fun to reread a pleasant book, and terrible to reread a bad one. Luckily for me, I make sure to avoid rereading terrible books. Although, you know, a book might have been great 10 years ago, but now it doesn't hold up, and so we find ourselves rereading bad fiction sometimes. Anyway, if you have a comment about anything I said in this video, or you want to suggest a book that I reread, even though you probably don't know books that I've reread, you know, just comment below. I would love to hear from you. You are an interesting person. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people may see the reread tag video and may do it if they so choose. Until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and copying travels, so that you can reread, you know, farewell.